Well, hello and welcome or welcome back to Read Becca. It's time once again for my weekly chatty catch up on everything I've read, everything I'm currently reading, and everything I'm looking forward to reading for roughly the present week, as well as some general lifey chit chat. So it was a decent reading week, I would say. I didn't finish a lot this week that I have to talk about. So the first one I don't have a ton to talk about because everyone knows what it is, and that is the children's classic, The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. And I did not read this copy. This is a very abridged children's version for young children, but it's from the dollar bin at Target. I have a whole bunch of these just to have on hand. And I loved this. I listened to the audio from Hoopla, in fact, and there are multiple different audio narrations available as well as plays on Hoopla, so highly recommend checking that out. I may actually go to one of the plays because I grew up watching the movie, certainly the older movie. I think a newer one has been made since, but I never read the unabridged book, and I loved it. It was so much more than I expected, though. So things that I think maybe a child would not pick up, or that I didn't pick up at least from the movie or from the abridged version, are just how neglected our young protagonist is, Mary. So she is growing up with these parents in India, British parents, and they have servants all around. She is cared for continuously in terms of having her survival needs met, but she has no affection in her life whatsoever. And her parents are so neglectful. They seem to just want to party and carouse. It seems like probably they're having affairs and just parties all the time. And then an epidemic spreads, a cholera epidemic, and people are dying left and right, it seems. And she is just completely forgotten. So we kind of meet her in this lonely state where she has been abandoned and is alone there and gotten drunk because she is by herself and doesn't really know anything or how to survive because she's used to having every single thing just done to her, more or less. She doesn't have any agency in her life because her life is so on rails with these servants doing everything. She doesn't know how to play even, really, it seems. So that's the start of us getting to know her, is this kid who just really has had a hard go of it. And then she is swept up and sent off to the British moors and to a family member that she doesn't know, an uncle she's never met. They all have misconceptions about her. She has misconceptions about them. But initially, it doesn't seem like she even meets the uncle. She's just there being cared for, again, by servants for quite some time. But the dynamic between her and the servants seems much more affectionate and considerate, I would say, where in India, there was a hierarchy, a very, very clear hierarchy that I think probably the people on the other side were fearful very much more so than the servants in England. And that comes up in a pretty significant way in terms of the conversation about race. Mary has a conversation with a servant, Martha, who she kind of befriends and who is very caring toward her and welcomes her almost into the family. And so Mary and Martha are having this conversation, and Martha talks about this misconception that she thought that Mary was going to be Indian or part Indian because she was coming from India, basically. And Mary is deeply offended by that because she thinks of native Indians as not people. And she explicitly says that and uses that verbiage. So that was horrible. She's a 10-year-old child, so she doesn't know anything different than what she's been taught, obviously. But it was very jarring to hear that. So this exposed me to some new things there. And things that you wouldn't pick up as a kid, I think. She also is very jarring as a character because that lack of empathy, which you can understand and you can feel for her because she's come up with such a solipsistic existence where everything kind of revolved around her, and she was so limited to just having these servants who she didn't even think of as people all around her and never got affection and care. And so she is very much a brat, like horrible, horrible brat at the start who just lives to be served, but not in a kind of tyrant way, in a way she doesn't even recognize it. However, there's a jarring dissonance is what I was getting at with that, where she is so attached and connected with animals and nature. I didn't find that totally believable for a character that is this caught up in themselves. I would expect them to also treat those things as, they're for me, I can do whatever I want, rather than having the level of empathy she did. But is what makes this story so magical. So she has shown up here in England, and the story that anyone pretty much knows is that her uncle's wife had died some time ago and left a garden that she loved. And after her death, the uncle shut that garden up and it was never reopened, basically. But Mary, through friendships, through a connection with this little bird, who I think the bird is depicted there, a little robin, who's flying in and out of this closed up garden, kind of lures her and goads her on to find the key and get it open and start sneaking in and taking care of the garden. And she becomes enamored in this project. And I loved that aspect of it, just seeing her blooming and blossoming as a person, finding something that she can take care of and invest herself in that she's never ever had before. So we see a real character journey in this, which is amazing for a children's book that's fairly light and easy to read. To really get that depth of character is so fantastic. And it is also really funny to see her changing and growing, because she's taking wonder in it and reflecting on how different she is along the way. And even just small little minor details, like her commenting very frequently about how she's getting fat and taking delight in that, because she was so stick thin and just was used to the extreme heat and now is kind of acclimating to the Moorish gloom, I guess. We also have such great nature writing here. I loved that aspect so much. So Hodgson Burnett really was a master of nature writing. The animals description, there's kind of a nature boy character, Dickon, who really is not magical in any way, but he brings magic of having animals surrounding him all the way and having sort of an ability to talk to nature, communicate with nature without it being magical. And he's so fantastic. But we also have that contrast between the heat of India and the gloom of the Moors, but we also see the Moors waking up to spring as she's sort of progressing through this journey of taking on this garden. And just so much about that detail it carries you away, truly. So I very, very much enjoyed this, and I'm so thrilled to have finally read the unabridged version for once, because it's been lingering for ages. So that's that one. Somewhat less successful, but I am glad to have read a classic here. Oh, and that one was actually for my book club. We read all sorts of things, but that was for the book club this month. But Conan, the Victorious, by Robert Jordan of Wheel of Time fame, I picked up for Cimmerianseptember. And I've had this on my shelves for a little while. You can see this great cover. I don't even know who did the art. I didn't check. Boris Vallejo is the artist of the cover. So this is following Conan in... I've never read any Conan by Robert E. Howard, the originator of the character, but Conan is sort of a barbarian character, and the stories are usually very episodic adventures. So I had no doubt I could probably just jump into this, and that was true. Conan is beginning in sort of a India-inspired place, it seems, and you can see this big 6-armed demon, though he has 8 arms in the book, who gets summoned and triggers off some things. I sort of lost the plot as this went along. Mainly, at the beginning, Conan is in Sultanpur, the India-esque place, and he is mistaken for a murderer of a prince there. And nobody particularly likes the prince. The prince was kind of annoying. And so they seem to be glad the prince is dead, but obviously they have to hunt down whoever committed the murder. And interestingly, this probably was the most interesting part for me, was that Conan finds himself the victim of racial profiling, more or less, because he's the only person of lighter skin, though he's not very light-skinned. He's usually extremely tan and muscly. Lighter skin and blue eyes, and just looks very, very different and stands out. And they believe the murderer was someone who looked like that. And so he's on the run from the police for this murder, trying to get out of Sultanpur. But it's caught up in this whole demon scheme and lots of political maneuvering. In fact, the epilogue, I felt, was more coherent in terms of what was going on politically than the entire rest of the book. Otherwise, this was pretty standard fare for Robert Jordan, like very long, detailed descriptions of just everyday things, like descriptions of what people look like, that sort of thing. Lots and lots of traveling. I found myself wanting to skim the traveling and then realizing, oh dear, the traveling is the book. And that is, again, a hallmark of Jordan's work in Wheel of Time that I'm familiar with. Lots of other things that he's known for, like and I think this is probably typical of Conan books by other authors as well, that the women are almost exclusively described by curves and breasts. There are definitely mentions of threats to spank women. That's another Jordan hallmark. But his writing is really so fantastic. So I want to read this description of the demon here. Mazrak, I summon you. A rushing came as though all the winds of the world poured through vast caverns. A thunderclap smote the chamber, and within the flame-barred cage there floated a huge 8-armed shape, twice as tall as any man and more, with skin like polished obsidian. Its only garb was a silver necklace from which depended 3 human skulls, and its body was smooth and sexless. 2 of its hands held silver swords that shone with an unearthly light. 2 more held spears with human skulls hanging below the points for decoration, and another grasped a needle-pointed dagger. Each weapon shared the glaucous otherworldly glow. Large leathery ears twitched on the hairless head, and sharply slanted ruby eyes swiveled to nightfall. So it's very detailed and descriptive and wordy, and yet it's also kind of supposed to be this very action-adventure. And I didn't find it to have really a ton of action and adventure. It was mostly sort of journeying. And so I don't feel like I got the true Conan experience by reading this, but it was an okay entry into Conan, I think. I got a sense of the character a little bit more. I have read Farfard and the Grey Mouser a bit before, which is kind of in the same vein, but never Conan. So I'm glad to have tried it for Cimmerian September and to have dabbled into this Robert Jordan book that I had not experienced before. So those are what I read this week. I have also completed my Book 2 prize reading just in time, so I need to enter my final decisions on what my rankings are, and that, I believe, should be announced next week. So I was reading for nonfiction, obviously. The other things that I have in progress right now, I've got A Prisoner in Malta by Philip Dupuy. This is a historical mystery, and The Long Path to Wisdom, which is a collection of folklore that I'm just kind of picking up and reading 1 or 2 every morning. It's been very nice. So that's what I'm reading. What I watched. I don't have a ton to talk about this because it's been everywhere, but I finally watched K-pop Demon Hunters, and it was so fun. So this is an animated movie that is in English. It's not in Korean. And it is a musical that's all about these girls who are in a K-pop band, and they are secretly demon hunters. And then a boy band of demons comes and fights them, kind of. But of course, there are additional details about that I won't give away the secret. But it's so fun, and the music is super duper catchy. So it didn't blow me away as like a new favorite, but the music has definitely been stuck in my head, and so I kind of went down a rabbit hole of like finding music that was kind of similar and listening to more K-pop than I really ever have this week. So that was one rabbit hole. And I think that's all I watched, I believe, this week, actually, or finished. I should say I have started something. So over the past couple of years, really since 2020, I kind of made a project in the background for myself to watch sort of zeitgeist shows that I missed out on. And I've done a few of those long-running ones, like Bob's Burgers. And I decided it was the perfect autumnal time to dive into watching Gilmore Girls. So I'm only in the first season. I have not finished that, but that will probably take a while. I don't even know how many seasons there are, like 7 or 8, and I think there's a movie, maybe. So I'm in the first season. I'm liking it very much, and it does seem like it's very perfect timing for cozy watches. I very much relate to Rory. I find Lorelai really annoying, and I think the grandma is my favorite character so far. So we will see how things go as it moves along, but it does not seem very realistic. However, it is quite cozy. So that's all my watching. And then as far as my week, it was a good week. It was Oktoberfest this weekend, and that was kind of odd because I went to the location, which is just outside of the city county, kind of. It's in the next adjacent county. And it's a very different demographic there. And so every time I go over there, it's a little jarring, and it's been a while since I've been over there. And so this was a sort of mixed event where like half of it was, there were multiple music stages. Half of it was like polka and proper Oktoberfest stuff, and the other stuff was like country western very strongly. And so there was a real mix of people. And this is a very right-leaning area. So it's maybe a little less present than usual in terms of seeing political messaging everywhere than normal. It was maybe down a bit, but it was still a lot and kind of jarring coming from a very progressive city area. Every time I go over there, it's like, yeah, this does exist. Otherwise, I guess kind of on that note, I also sort of went down a rabbit hole this week of the Rapture Talk event this week. So I didn't really know anything about it leading up, but have since followed a lot of the commentary after the fact and analysis of the response posted. So if you don't know what this is the biblical rapture. People make predictions or claim to know when it's going to happen every so often. The last big groundswell surrounding it was in 2011. So there was supposed to be a rapture on September 23rd or 24th this year as a result of some random guy in South Africa having said that based on important dates and numerology, more or less. All complete nonsense. And yet it gained a real groundswell, specifically online. And this is the first time something like this has happened, I think, with such a level of groundswell since the social media era, or at least modern types of social media, really. I mean, 2011, obviously, social media existed, the internet existed, but this is the first really big one. And so coming out of that, obviously we are past the dates that it was supposed to happen, has been really interesting to see the difference, because some people are kind of trying to back away from having been very vocal that this was definitely going to happen, et cetera, et cetera. But it's a real different dynamic because they're kind of not able to just back away from it. And there has been meaningful amounts of people who are actually saying they're sorry for being deceived and spreading misinformation. A non-zero number, at least. There have been a number of people who have removed their online presence as a result of it. And so that has been an interesting shift in dynamic, where usually you don't see that in these cases. I've seen this happen multiple times over my life, and the people just kind of disengage from it and go, well, it didn't happen, but it could happen anytime, that sort of thing, or they just push it out, more or less. And so this has been a real interesting dynamic because multiple other things politically have also happened this week that have in many ways had people walking back their ideology or separating from their ideology in some way. A very deeply held ideology that they had, they're sort of having to inspect it a little bit. And so it feels like there's multiple disparate and disconnected things going on at the same time that are all causing tides to turn a bit. Maybe. We'll see if they last. But it was very interesting to see this as someone who's been through it in the past and witnessed people who have gotten really caught up in these things, only to see them just keep moving forward, where this feels like they're not really able to do that. They're being confronted with it very, very much more. And that's making people rethink a little bit. So I went down that rabbit hole, and as a result, I've been way, way behind on watching YouTube, so I don't have any recommendations for you this week. I think otherwise, in general life stuff, I don't know if you can even see it now, thankfully, but I got a new foster, and I've got a big old scratch on my face because I made a very rookie mistake. He's fine, I'm fine, it was not a big deal. But unfortunately, just don't pick up a strange cat toward your face, even if they are very loving, especially if they're after surgery. So he is just here for a couple weeks for surgery recovery, and he just gave me a single swat, and I'm okay. Otherwise, the weather did not materialize as I had hoped last week. We didn't really get any rain. We got one day instead of a week of rain that I didn't have to water. All the rest of the days, not so much. However, it has started getting dark. Our days are shortening massively. So one day I thought it was going to storm, but in fact it was just getting darker, like an hour and a half earlier than usual. So I'm happy about that. That's at least giving me some seasonal vibes, but it is still hot. I don't know if you can hear it, but my AC is still running because it's quite warm. I think it's supposed to get up to 90 this week, which is very frustrating. I don't want to be in summer. It's September. It's almost October. I'm getting ready to get out my Halloween decorations for outside, and maybe that will flip over the weather and we'll finally get some autumnal vibes. So I think that's all, since as I said, I don't have any recommendations, and that was pretty much my week. So hopefully you are having a wonderful week in reading and in life, and thank you so very much for watching.